Before the Industrial Revolution, America was an agricultural-based society. And in this world, men and women were considered equal partners in the running of a home and farm. Chores and duties were divided accordingly.
It was when the Industrial Revolution came into play in the late 1700s, the early 1800s, that the roles began to change. Married men were now going off to work to get paid, and women were left at home. And society began to label them as women's work and domestic unpaid help. Unfortunately, this role devalued women's work as well as devaluing the role of women in society.
Women's work. Just two words, but they said so much. The words implied that domestic chores were not for men and not as important or as valuable as the work the men were doing, and that the career paths outside the home were not for women. For the most part, women were excluded from the workforce through the 1800s, with one exception: teaching. By mid-century, teaching became an increasingly female occupation because schools could pay a woman 1/3 of what they could pay a man. Teaching was also seen as one of the only acceptable careers for single women because it was considered good training for motherhood.
By the time the 20th century comes along, we're into the machine age. At this time, fewer laborers are needed and more customer service representatives. Many of the mom and pop stores that we had all known and loved gave way to the world of department stores. And at this time, clerks were needed, customer service representatives, and other jobs that men did not choose to take, but women took over.
Although the machine age opened up new jobs for women, these jobs did not come with the opportunities to advance to a position of power or make a sustainable salary. Even the milestone of women getting the right to vote in 1920 didn't penetrate the male-dominated fortress of the business world. Over the next 50 years, there would be only one exception to the rule of a woman's place being in the home, and that would happen during World War II. 6 million women, inspired by the patriotic concept of Rosie the Riveter, entered factories and other jobs to free men up to fight. But however talented and hardworking they were, these women were let go the moment the soldiers came marching home. By the 1950s, women were back home and in the kitchen.
I still remembered images and talk of Rosie the Riveter, and that was the symbol of the woman who worked during World War II and put rivets into the airplanes because the men were at war. However, in the 50s then, as I was growing up, television came of age, and there were shows like Leave It to Beaver, which was about a little boy whose nickname was Beaver. But in that show, his father went off to work every day, and his mother stayed home, took care of the family, and when it was time for her husband to come home, she would get on a nice, clean, crisp dress. She would put on her pearls and her lipstick, and she would meet him at the door with a big smile and, of course, dinner ready in the oven. And so we were conflicted because Rosie the Riveter, who was allowed to go to work, morphed into June Cleaver, who was expected to stay home in her pearls and starched dress. And that became a problem in terms of deciding what we ought to do with our lives.
As the civil unrest of the 60s unfolded, women, as well as people of color, saw attitudes start to change and the doors of opportunity begin to open. In 1963, the Equal Pay Act was signed into law. It was followed the next year by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, eliminating discrimination on the basis of sex in hiring, promoting, and firing. But it was Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 that swung open the doors so women could start to get the education they needed to compete in the business world.
You can see how much better women are because of Title IX. Because if medical schools receive money from the federal government, then they cannot discriminate against women in their admissions. And this applies for law school, for business school, for all kinds of professional schools.
With degrees in hand, women began to enter the workforce, only to find that while the law of the land had changed, the male attitudes and mindset were still the same.
No one was prepared to hire women, and in fact, I really hit life's brick wall when I graduated from law school. I looked for a job for 4 months. I interviewed every major law firm in Houston, and I did not get a job offer. And I did have one interviewer say, gosh, you know, we just can't put a woman in our law firm because we'll spend all this time and effort and money training you, and then you'll get married or get pregnant, and that will all be lost.
I was working exceedingly hard, but I was totally immersed in terms of the business. And one of the partners walked into my office, someone actually with whom I had not worked, and looked at me and he said, you know, I don't know why you're working so hard. We will never have a female partner at Korn Ferry. Out of the blue, no reason for him to do that. And so it stunned me and took me aback. And when I did become a partner was probably a span of 7 years. And I was the first woman partner at Korn Ferry, which is an honor and a privilege, but even more encouraging and satisfying for me is we now have probably at least 45% of our partnership, 40 to 45% are female.
When I first came into the corporate world, I felt as if, you know, I wasn't going to fit in because, you know, I came with a different set of principles and values. And what I learned was you cannot possibly try to be someone that you're not yourself. If you try to do that, you're not going to be successful.
Some women chose not to enter the corporate world, but instead take matters into their own hands and become entrepreneurs. The risks were higher, but so are the rewards.
When I got my first McDonald's, it didn't come easy. It was a lot of hard work. It was long hours of working, a lot of perseverance. It took about 6 years before I was finally able to feel I was there. I was actually making money. I was actually getting what I wanted to get accomplished.
I had to build the TV station by hand. I literally built it by hand. I went up, I hung the wires, I rode the cables, I painted the building, I scrubbed the floors. I did everything that I could do to cut costs so I could get on the air. It cost me about $2 million to get on the air, and I had to borrow that. Not knowing, I had never run a television station in my life, but I figured if I could run radio, I might as well try it. And so it took me from that point, 1982, to get it up, get it going, about 1983-4, until 2004, I sold it for $50 million.
One of the most important things, I think, as an entrepreneur, which is somewhat different from other successful women in business, is that as an entrepreneur, you start out with a vision and you work to have that vision come to fruition. And a vision's really a dream, right? And so every young woman can have a dream, a vision, and then apply themselves and be willing to do what it takes to bring that vision to fruition.
Women in America have had a long and proud history as entrepreneurs. For most of our country's history, it was the only career path available.
If you look back historically, many of the successful women were entrepreneurs because they weren't allowed into that man's world, and so therefore they had to be business owners themselves in order to work, in order to have the businesses that they wanted for themselves, or to achieve the vision that they wanted for themselves.
One such entrepreneurial pioneer was C.J. Walker. Born in 1867, her parents and older siblings had been slaves. Having a sharp and inventive mind, Walker developed and sold hair care products for African American women. At her death, she was considered to be the wealthiest African American woman in America, and known to be the first self-made female American millionaire.
One of my heroes is Madam C.J. Walker, who came from the depths of poverty and was able to create a business that offered employment to thousands of black women, giving them a way out of the fields and domestic service. It was a wonderful thing that she did back there in the 1890s into the turn of the 20th century, when there were so few economic opportunities available to black women.
Today, women's work is no longer confined to the kitchen, but spans the corporate boardrooms and independent businesses across America. Given the opportunity to compete fairly, on equal ground, women continue to prove themselves as savvy entrepreneurs and commanding corporate leaders that are second to none. But challenges and obstacles still exist.
Well, I would say, unfortunately, we've made progress, but not enough progress. You know, there's only 3% of women who run the Fortune 500 companies, boards, corporate boards are 10 or 12%. So there's still a lot more room for growth in terms of women moving up through the organization.
The beauty for me now, for women, that didn't exist as much when I first started, is you have choices. You have choices to be in business, you have choices to be in not-for-profit, you have choices to give back to the community, you have choices to start a family and live a family, or integrate all of those. But the primary thing is take a choice, make a choice, and then do everything you can to maximize your life, no matter what you decide to do.
Things are much better now. There's many women that has gone on before me that has paved the road and proven themselves. So things are much easier for me, but I think we still have a long ways to go.
My pride has always been on my knowledge, my ability, and to win. And I wouldn't let anybody stop me on that.
The thing today for young women coming up is that I think that they need to recognize that their mothers, their grandmothers, many amazing women have blazed trails for them that have opened doors for them to be able to be successful today. And that it is somewhat easier for us today to have the opportunities that we have. And so therefore I think there's a responsibility for us to seize the opportunities that are set before us.